Good afternoon, everybody. Tech Talk 98 is today. Tech Talk number 98. Let's see if I get anybody signed up on here. Charlie Edmondson and Brent. Charlie, I can't. Wow, man. Charlie, you're the man. Thank you. Matt, Linwood. Let's see who else I get on here. Charlie, man, that's great stuff. Daryl, if I can raise this up, maybe I can see better. I don't know. And one day you're going to get a little bit older and you're going to have a little bit of eyesight trouble too. I haven't been able to figure out exactly what I need to do with my glasses. Kevin, hey Kevin. Daryl, great. Hey, if you guys signed up on here today to come look at me to tell you something that you want me to say, or you need me to agree with you, or let me turn it up. I don't know if I got the volume high enough. Yep. And maybe, well, I only have my opinion, okay? Hey, Kenny and George. Kevin, yep. Good to see you, man. Champ, Bryce, good name, good name. Charlie, wow, Cow Chip is on there, man. I had a picture on Facebook of me racing Terry Vance in Rockingham and beat Terry in the final, but Charlie was number one qualifier of that race. Isn't that right, Charlie? Travis, good to see you guys. I spoke with you today, talking about the old days. Hey, Mitchell and Jerry, good to see you guys. But back to what I was going to tell you is, this is not the place you go to hear me support your beliefs. That's not what this is about. This isn't church. This isn't religion. This is going to be a list and my opinions. This is going to be things that I think that I know. I think I know. I'm not going to tell you ideas about engines and things I found based on what I read or what somebody said. Not based on what I read or what somebody said. This is going to be empirical data that I have gathered myself over decades, messing around with hot rods and engines, motorcycles and cars. We've worked on stuff from 100 cc's all the way to, well, 50 cc's all the way to 900 plus cubic inches. Really, really big engines. And hey, Tanner, hey, Greg, hey, Baz. Good to see you guys' names on here. Somewhere along the line, there's been this belief that connecting rods, somebody came up with the idea. Maybe it was Grumpy, God bless his soul, maybe Smokey, God bless him, and maybe it was somebody else that was really, really famous, but they did the math and figured out that there was things that a long rod would do compared to a short rod. And I just want to give you some myth dispelling combinations of words that I think are true based on my knowledge and based on my experience, okay? One thing is I haven't been able to find an engine where you want a longer rod unless it was too short. Not because a longer rod is better than a short rod. There's a few things that make me feel other way. Backwards. I'm not going to try and build an engine so it has short rods. That's not a goal. I'm not going to build an engine or recommend you build an engine to make it have longer rods. That's not a goal. If I were to take the priorities of what it takes to make a really, really fast, record-setting, high-performance, long-endurance engine, I would say that the rod length or the rod ratio, the rod-to-stroke ratio would be number 37 on the list of the to-dos. It would be so far off the page, it would be on the third page. Hey, Chris, hey, David, what we found is the rod, after you get the bore right, and after you get the stroke right, and you got the cubic inches right, and you do everything, get your ring pack. Got to have a certain amount of real estate for you to have a nice ring pack. You got to have a good location and relationship between the piston, the skirts, the wrist pin, and the ring stack. And then the block deck height. And I'm going to give you a couple ideas right off the top of my head. Hey, Raymond. The rod is the last thing I figure. It is, when I get the piston I want, I get the block like I want it, get the crank like I want it, get the stroke like I want it, then I throw a tape measure on the rod journal and the wrist pin, and whatever that tape measure says, that's the rod that we order. Hey, I got room for a 6-inch rod. You got them in stock. Hey, I got room for a 6 1/8. I got room for a 5.7. Whatever. It's what's left. Man, somebody keeps calling. I am sorry. Don't y'all know I'm doing Tech Talk Tuesday? Thank y'all for watching. And I'm sorry about my opinionated position here, but this comes from data that I've observed on my own. Is a short rod better than a long rod? No. Is a long rod better than a short rod motor? No. It's a necessity to have a rod. If somebody says, what does the connecting rod do? I say, well, it connects the piston to the crankshaft, and it helps the piston go up and down. Now, there are some things, the cylinder bore does that too, but the bore is important to me. What's the biggest bore we can get? And the reason I want the biggest bore is because I want the most and the largest valves I can get, so that I can get the cam timing right, so that when the piston's going down, we open the intake valve, and then when the piston stops at the bottom, the intake valve is open far enough to let some more come in that has momentum and inertia, and then right when the piston's coming back up and the pressure between what's going on under the valve and above the valve is very close to the same pressure, we like shut the intake valve and then squeeze it for compression, light the spark plug, turn it over and go bang for compression, and halfway down on the compression stroke we open the exhaust valve, and when the piston goes down we hope we got the exhaust valve open enough for a lot of the pressure to go out, and then the piston comes up and chases the exhaust valve shut, and then all that goes up and down 100 times a second. And if you're going to do the math and figure out this rod ratio where it says that a longer rod will give you more dwell time at TDC. And I'm gonna tell you something, that's a true statement. I just hadn't figured out what the dwell time is for, man. I know it's there. I know it's worth something. There's somebody watching right here that can give me real scientific data why you need more dwell time. But at 100 times a second, I just don't see where that comes in. All right, let's just break it down and let's say you got a 4-inch stroke. Okay, that's about this much. All right, the piston's at the top, crankshaft rotates, piston goes to the bottom. Crankshaft rotates, piston goes to the top. That piston has to go 4 inches up and down while the crankshaft is turning around, okay? If it's a 4-inch stroke and you put a long rod in it, it still has to go up and down 4 inches. If you put a short rod in it, it still has to go up and down 4 inches. But there is mathematical proof that at somewhere in that 4 inches of stroke, the piston stays still for 1 degree longer or 2 degrees longer at the top, but it moves away from the bottom faster. That's the result of a different length rod. And vice versa with a shorter rod or a longer rod. I'm just telling you, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm sorry that y'all read somewhere, and if you want to change the channel now because I don't believe the same thing you believe about rod length, it's okay. It won't hurt my feelings. I love you anyway. This is just an opinion story, okay? It's not worth, I won't argue about it because I don't have any argument in it. I just know that I mean, Bob, you're on here. I saw you, I quoted Bob, number 37 or number 39 on his priority list of the rod length. That's the result of everything else that matters. Now, let me say this bold statement right here. This is from my own personal experience. There is more performance difference up or down. There's more torque difference up or down. There's more horsepower difference up or down with 1 degree of intake valve closing time, like closing a valve at 50 or 49 or 51. There is more torque curve change than a 1/4 inch longer or shorter rod. Think about that. We get so excited about rod length and we spend so many hours and so much time on the math, but we don't do a good job on figuring out how to trap that mixture, because the rod's going to make the piston go up and down whatever the crankshaft says. So I made a post the other day that said, what if I told you that the rod length doesn't change the stroke? It doesn't. It is not related. It's not. Yes, it is connected. It is connected because the rod is bolted to the crankshaft. That is why it's connected. Going to another thing, any kind of racing, any kind of car, motorcycle, road racing, circle track, I don't care what you got. You want the engine as low in the chassis as possible. You want the weight, the massive weight of the engine to be low in the chassis. We want the crankshaft as close to the ground as we can get it. All right? If you put a long rod in the engine, there's a chance you're going to move the cylinder heads higher. There's a chance you're going to put a taller deck block. there's a chance that you don't have push rods. But if you do have push rods, if you put a longer rod in it and move the deck height higher, the camshaft is here, and you're gonna put longer push rods in it, and the push rod is a pole vault. So the longer the push rod is, the more it flexes. And if you're going 10,000, 9,000, 6,000 RPM, your push rods are doing this. They really are. And there's guys on here that have seen it, they've seen the proof of it, and I'm sorry to disappoint you by not wanting long rods, so I have to have long push rods. Let's say you don't have push rods, you have an overhead cam engine. Well, go and measure the cams. The cams are heavy, 4 of them up there. The cams are up there, and the longer the rod and the taller the deck height, the higher up the cams are, and your center of gravity of your vehicle is up. So we don't want, I don't build one to put longer rods in it. Is there a rod ratio that's too short? Yes, there is. Is there a rod ratio that's too long? I don't know. But does it change how much it draws on the cylinder head? If it does, the flow bench can't see it, the performance can't see it, the torque curve can't see it, and if you believe that you can put a 200 thou or 300 thou longer or shorter rod in and see some change in performance, I would say that it is an imagination on your part, not mine. We can have an argument about it, but I won't argue. But I can listen to you because I am not right about this. This is my opinion. I'm not right. I am not right. Look, I didn't write the book. I didn't write Smokey's book. I didn't write Grumpy Jenkins' book. I didn't write How to Win with a Horsepower book. I didn't. But over my years, with everything from 50 cc's to 900 cubic inches, the rod that we settled on was the only one we could really use. We wanted the heads as low as we could get them. We wanted the valve train to be short. We wanted the whole package short, but we wanted the most important thing was ring seal. So we had to build a piston that had a good ring real estate, and we had to put, let me tell you about the stroke. The stroke is how you get the cubic inches to suit the rules. The bore is dictated by the cylinder wall thickness and the head gasket availability, or the stud pattern, or whatever. But you want the biggest bore you can put in the engine. People say, yeah, but a longer stroke gives you more torque. No, more cubic inches gives you more torque. If you want more torque and you can put a bigger engine in it, you can put a bigger bore and you gain torque instantly. You can have a bigger engine, put more stroke in it, you will gain torque. The torque curve can be maximized. I've seen a lot of people talk about this and write about this, but it's somewhere near 1.5 horsepower per cubic inch. That's the torque limit per cubic inch. So if you have 1,000 cubic inches, you should be able to have 1,500 foot-pounds. If you want the horsepower per cubic inch, that's a different story. But listen to me, torque. What we learned when we started racing the S&S Pro Stock engines with S&S back in the early 2000s was they wanted to put a lot of stroke in it at first because that's the way S&S did it. All their engines, they were known for the stroker crank, so you had to have a stroker to make power, but it won't go fast enough. The crankshaft won't go fast enough. The guy that has the fastest V-twin, which is a short section of a V8, the guy that has the fastest one in the world runs the shortest stroke crank because he can turn more RPM. The fastest V-twin at the NHRA Pro Stock races has a shorter stroke. Fastest Pro Stock car at the races has the shortest stroke. They run a 4.7 bore and a 3.5 crank. And if they wanted more stroke, they could put more stroke in it, but it goes slower because you can't put a big enough valve in it to have a 500 cubic inch limit. If you're unlimited on cubic inches, like say a John Kazi or a Sonny Leonard, God rest his soul, you know, a Sonny Leonard style mountain motor, you put everything you can in there. You put all the bore that will fit first. You put all the stroke that will fit second. And then you put the deck as high as it can go, and then you put rods that will connect them. The rod ratio is never good when you have a V8 and you have a 6-inch stroke crank. There is no good rod ratio there. If you build the engine as big as you can build it, you are not going to be trying to get a correct rod ratio. You're going to try and get the most cubic inches you can, and you make the engine as tall as you can, and you put enough piston in it, and you put enough stroke in it, and put the tape measure between the wrist pin and the crank and tell what the rod length is, and it's not good. Now, F1, they play around a lot with that, according to what I know. They play around with the rod ratios, but they also have very short stroke and they have very short rods, so they can get away with it. But they used to have the shortest engine would win because it would fit low in the car and it would handle the best. Now they got rules. I think it's called a moratorium or something, where you can't reinvent stuff because now the rules are set. The engine height is set, the engine weight is set, the bank angles are set. There's so much restriction on there now. And if you're going to talk about restrictions, I'm going to tell you about RPM. They limit RPM. They limit RPM in every kind of racing that I know. They limit RPM. They even limit RPM in pro stock cars. They limit RPM in NASCAR. They limit RPM in IndyCar. They limit RPM in Formula One because they think that's the great equalizer, but everybody figures out how to make the piston go as fast as they can based on having the right amount of piston speed and stroke to make it work. Now, think about what I'm saying. I see some of you guys signed on late, and I'm not reading what all you put. Increase doesn't do this, and the increased rod doesn't do this, increased stroke doesn't do that. Yeah, you're right. But if you build an engine from scratch, like there's a guy on here named Kevin, he builds single-cylinder engines from scratch. He gets to put the stroke he wants, the bore he wants. He gets to offset the bore front to rear. He gets to put the rod length he wants in it, and he will tell you that it doesn't make a diddly. The rod length doesn't make a diddly. The rod's job is to keep the piston from hitting the crank, the counterweights, and the rod's job is to keep the piston from coming out of the top on overlap when both valves are open at maximum RPM. It is something that you just have to have it. The same guy that wrote the rules in the books about you had to have the longest rod ratio you could get, he was limited on RPM, but it wasn't because he didn't know it, but he had cast heads. He had Chevrolet cast heads, Ford cast heads, and they were limited in airflow because the bore was little, because there were no blocks that had big bore. They were all small bore, and he would put the most stroke he could in it to get the cubic inch to make it legal. 50 years ago in NASCAR, when they had all different size, big blocks, small blocks, everybody still would put the biggest bore they could in so they could make them flow good, and that's just the way, the evolution of the game. Pro stock motorcycles right now, they have the biggest valves that will fit. If their bore is this big, the valves are hanging out of it. If you get a brand new super bike, a new BMW 1000 or a Honda or Yamaha 1000 or the new Hayabusa or the KZ or the ZX14, their bores are huge, their strokes are short, and their pistons are giant, and the rod ratio ain't great because you want low center of gravity, you want low weight. I am sorry that this is not going along with your belief, but hey, that's not my job. I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right. I'm telling you my opinions, and if you want to know my opinions, you're at the right place. And I'm going to change this screen over, and let's go to the board right quick. Let's see if I know how to do it without looking too dumb. There's the Tech Talk 98. I believe that's the right number today. I am retired from the drama of having an engine shop every day, so I got these socks that say, I am retired, do not disturb, because I am retired. That's me, in case you wondered about my socks. Not many of you care about my socks, but it is kind of funny. I'm a socky person. All right, just listening. Hey, Eric. Hey, Steve. Todd. All right, I want to talk about a camshaft thing right quick because there's a lot of misunderstanding about this too. If you have an engine builder that says you need a 270-degree intake lobe, and you go order a 270 intake lobe, and you call the cam company and say, I got a 350 Chevy, and my engine builder says I need a 270 lobe. Okay, that's great. They're in the book. They got lots of them. But is this 270 degrees based on 30 degrees before top open and 60 degrees after bottom close? Let's see if I got that right. 30 and 60 is 90, and 180 makes 270. So you do, this is how you figure the duration. You do 30 opening plus 60 close and plus 180, and it equals 270. And because I have it available, I'm just going to verify this because when I talk live, sometimes I make mistakes in my math. 30 plus 60 plus 180 equals 270. Okay, I got that right. All right, let's do a 270, and also let's get a 270 cam that has a 20-degree opening and a 70-degree close. 20 degrees before top dead center, the intake valve opens. 70 degrees after top dead center, the intake valve closes. And it opens and closes, and add 180 degrees for the intake stroke, and now you have a 270 cam. But if you'll look, this could be 50 horsepower difference. This right here, I would pick this one unless I wanted to turn 4,000 RPM. I would pick this one if I want to run 4,000 RPM. And if I had this one, I would change it right here. I would change this to 20, and I would immediately, because I don't need that much overlap, and that would make this a 260 cam. Then I could run this one for top end power, like I'm going to make peak power 1,000 RPM higher by closing the intake valve at 70, and I'm going to make 1,000 less, 1,000 early. I'm going to make peak power 1,000 RPM early by closing the intake valve at 60 after bottom. So it's not just the duration number. And I know some of you guys are timing out because I'm in the wrong zone of what you want to hear about. But if you did the intake and the exhaust cam, and then you put them in and you got 270 and 260, let's say you had a 270 on the intake and you had a 260 on the exhaust, where are these degreed in at? Well, this intake would be, let's do the math. I'll make sure I do it right. 20 plus 70 closing plus 180 equals 270 degrees duration divided by 2 equals a 135 minus the opening, which is 20, equals, the intake is in at 115. That is lobe center. This is duration. So you guys will know this is lobe center, this is duration, and this is events. Now let's do the exhaust. The exhaust, same way, it's 20 closing, 60 opening, plus 180 equals 260 divided by 2 equals 260 divided by 2 equals 130 minus 20 would be 110. Minus 20 equals. I love it live. You want to fumble and stumble. 260 is the duration divided by 2 equals 130 minus the opening, or the closing, I should say. Wow, what does that say? I got somebody wrong here. Let's see how I do this. Hang tight, boys and girls. 20 plus 60 plus 180 equals 260 divided by 2 equals 130 minus 20 equals 110. Finally. So, the exhaust cam center line is at 110. This is really going to blow your mind. So the lobe separation angle is halfway between these two, which is 112.5, I think. And let me show you how to double check that. 115 plus 110 equals 225 divided by 2 equals 113. Yeah, it's 112.5. So the lobe separation angle on this cam is 112.5. The intake's in at 115. The exhaust is in at 110. What does that mean to you? Well, if you put it in what the cam manufacturer calls straight up, this is what you'll end up with. But if you advance it by 5 degrees, We're going to advance it by 5 degrees, so every number changes. This 20, we're going to advance it, so we're going to open it at 25. We're going to close this one at 65. $25 plus 65 plus 180 equals. It's still 270. It's still 270. And then this one, if you advance it on a V8, it's got one cam in the middle of the block. If you put this in, advance it by 5 degrees, you're going to have this, it's going to move now to 110. And if you advance the intake, it's also going to advance the exhaust. So now this was going to be 115. So we've just swapped the intake from 115 to 110, and we've just swapped the exhaust from 110 to 115, and the lobe separation is still 112.5. Wow, boom. Want to know more about that? Want to learn more about that? That AARP calculator needs retiring. Wrong way, thank you, you're right. So, we advance the intake cam to where instead of opening at 20 before top, we opened at 25 before top. Instead of closing it at 60, what did I do? At 70. We closed it earlier at 65, 5 degrees earlier. That's right. Same thing. So I wanted to share this with you guys and talk to you about rod length opinions, why this lobe center is the results of the opening and closing events, and lobe separation is the least important thing because it is, you have to do the opening and closing of the intake, the opening and closing of the exhaust, and you have to figure out the duration, and you have to figure out where they're degreed in it to get a lobe center. The lobe centers tell you what the lobe separation is. So the last thing you know or want to know is lobe separation. That's all I got. Thank you all for watching. Tech Talk number 98 from the retired opinionated engine builder guy. May God bless. Y'all watch some more. I'll be back next Tuesday. Thank you very much.